Just simply add, I have a plant sale coming up at the Conservation District in 2 weeks. This is our brochure in talking about invasive plants in your backyard. We pick out plants that would take the place of invasives in backyards. So I'm very engaged in what all the conservation districts do. But it's just a reminder of some of the things. And the purple I wear in my hair is because I really believe that we have to be sensitive to our environment and sensitive to what we need to do so that we can, the next generations coming up will have a safe, environmentally good place and a healthy place to live with clean water, clean air, and clean backyards. So thank you, and I welcome Tom. He's got more.
Thank you for coming, first of all. May I ask how many Cornwall Conservation Trust members or board members are here? Good showing. Conservation Commission? Yeah, and Houstonic Valley Association? Thank you for coming. And Houstonic River Commission? Thank you, thank you. And let's see, also Sharon Land Trust is present, and anybody from Kent? Thank you, thank you. All right, this is great. All right, we're going to be examining the threat that's presented by invasives and a man-made threat, incidentally, and a man-made solution. I think it's solvable, and we appreciate all the sponsors. During the course of the afternoon, the clipboard will pass for anybody who wishes to give us an email address to become part of the Northwest Connecticut Not Read Network. Okay, so my background as a photographer and as a native of Canaan, and hey, photography club, Houstonic Valley Regional High School in the early 60s, carried that forward, but also folded it into environmental activism from as early as the 70s, opposing the loss of trees. Therefore, I can legitimately call myself a tree preservationist, and I protected them from unwanted development, from Connecticut Department of Transportation, questionable landscape designs, from bittersweet vines, from Dutch elm disease, and even was involved with the planting and more recently the pruning of the American elm that sits outside here beside your parking lot. My portraits of trees spans nearly 50 years and emerges out of what I refer to as the pre-invasive era of my youth, when a tree like this in Robin Swamp in Falls Village was accessible and beautiful, and now would require machetes, chainsaws, brush blades, or whatever to access it. I even seriously doubt whether deer can maneuver through there. My one advertisement is that show will open to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Earth Day at the Berkshire Botanical Garden in exactly 1 year. This booklet is going to be the foundation for our comments, and we've distributed this widely for years to our school students at Houstonic Valley Regional High School and at all the lectures I've given. Each invasive in there, and there are now 18 represented in the booklet, is present in our northwest corner. It is produced by the Connecticut Conservation District Connecticut River Branch. And thank you, Karen and Cynthia Rabinowitz of the Northwest Conservation District for providing copies here. In addition, the Sharon Land Trust is supporting this with additional copies for the Salisbury talk. Just so you understand, we're going to be discussing mechanical control. Oh, I see. This is a, look at that. There's a, this is no longer appropriate technology because of the screen change. I can't point at anything up here. The first experience of that. Okay, so at any rate, what I meant to point to is mechanical and chemical controls are included for each invasive plant. And the reason I put this up there, just to let you know I'm not a wimp. I can bend over and pick invasives, but I have shifted to picking herbaceous invasives rather than woody shrubs after my rotator cuff injury and surgery. So a word of warning, as Bob Gambino, who's the Tonic River Commissioner and grandfather of invasive management in Northwest Connecticut, said, this is a gross misuse of herbicides, and it insulted all of you in Cornwall in 2016, if I recall. This is not what we are referring to when we're talking about the use of herbicides. The most vocal opponent of the use of glyphosate in Northwest Connecticut is Tony Peel, former director and general counsel of the World Health Organization, who lives in Sharon. And in his "Glyphosate is Killing Us All" article, he even got a little flack from people, and then it made an exception. To be perfectly clear, we are not talking about the careful, responsible, safe, and effective application of glyphosate by Tom Zetterstrom and others who fight invasive plants threatening native species. So, believe me, we do it with seriousness and judiciously. There is a seat down here if anybody wants one. What we're going to try to, I don't like this, look at today is there a pointer here? Yes. We prefer to be down here, prevention, where the cost-benefit ratio is very high. You get a lot more for your effort. When you're in eradication, it drops down to about a quarter of that, 1 to 100 versus 1 to 25. When you're in containment, the ratio is 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. So this speaks to the point that early detection and rapid response is advantageous. That really means we need to become informed. Japanese barberry is one of 3 invasives we're going to look at this afternoon. It is a woody shrub invasive. We're going to look at a herbaceous thicket, Japanese knotweed, and a Asiatic bittersweet vine. This was taken on April 5th of 2016. Snow on the ground. The bittersweet can't wait to get a head start. It's part of its invasive nature and how it competes. By October, it's laden with fruit, and 90% of the fruit in sun areas germinates. 40% in shaded areas germinates. Thus, the progression of time and the distribution by birds and chipmunks and mice spreads these out. We're at the low level of low to intermediate, but boy, this is the time where it starts to become visible, where you still have access to your land, let's say, and let's say we're in between early recognition in here, but it's not beyond control. Here we are starting to see the entire forest floor starting to get covered, but not that thickly. And as the barberry density increases, so does the tick frequency or density, such that 120 ticks per acre in a infested forest floor versus 10. So a factor of 12 is associated with that plant. It's due to the fact that there's moisture retention under the plants. The white-footed mouse moves around there carrying ticks and is protected by the thorny plant from predators. So it becomes its own little ecosystem. Severely impacted. So this is at the sort of upper range of the potential of the plant. And if we shift the camera from there to the left, we see the result of Norfolk Land Trust President Libby Borden's hand-pulling effort of barberry. She deserves a round of applause, but she's not here to hear it. But if she were, I will let her know that we wanted to applaud for her. So what she did was a minor miracle. And there are other people that do focus in on this method. If you have a bunch of high school or college volunteers with extra testosterone and upper body strength, and welder's gloves and eye protection and socks tucked in and DEET, go at it. But it is not for the faint of heart. There are tools like the weed wrench and or the honeysuckle topper that can give you increased leverage in separating the plant from the ground. We'll pull out these plants later for anyone who wants to look at the root systems. Certain plants, like barberry, are considered extractable manually, really, because they have shallow roots. When you get into the understory of a forest, you have intersecting roots of trees and not as easily extracted than, let's say, in a bottomland wetland shelf by a river where it's wet and muddy and, hey, you can loosen that thing up. In this case, we were testing it on privet, which is not barberry, but it's another invasive shrub. But we found that, boy, that root system is so fibrous that it really holds on to the soil. And we were creating more of an open disturbance than we really wanted to, assuming there would be seeds under there, and we didn't want to actually provide cultivated soil, if you will, for those seeds to regenerate. The other tools that can be useful when you're doing manual extraction are a garden fork, you're going to kind of pry it along as you go, and or even a come along and labor. Probably compared to other methods, 10 to 40 times greater amount of labor. Because we did advertise in the promo that we would be showing maps as a management tool, they will appear in my talk periodically. I don't have a map collection set aside. By the way, Deb, where are you? Where's Deb? Oh, okay. Listen, I'm just wondering, where am I supposed to look for my signal? Yeah. Deb is my timekeeper. I'm up to 10 minutes, so we're going to wrap up Barberry shortly. This is Turnip Top, the largest park in Salisbury. So as far as mapping, you make a Xerox of some kind of map. You print it light. You draw in your lines. We marked X's for bittersweet. We treated those. We'll see that in the next section. We have Barberry here. The Salisbury School is up here. Those kids go running around on these roads for the cross-country team. They're running right through Barberry. So we thought, okay, that's a health risk for kids in prep school. And so Todd Mervosh of TM Enterprises and Dr. Todd Mervosh, I might add, took that task on and did foliar spray of barberry in July it was, and notice, with the precision of targeting those plants with a backpack sprayer and walking around and spraying toward the center and avoiding by-spray on save plants, this was the effect. Here, across the road on top of Smith Hill, you can see the attraction of the plant initially, red color. It's a big selling point in the nursery trade, right? But shall we say, this is way at the top end of the scale of invasion. Jeff Ward, senior scientist of the Connecticut Agricultural Experimental Station, has done the research on barberry and ticks and has come up with the two-step method. And basically, you're eliminating the crown on the first step, cutting it. Or you could actually spray if it's a compact unit like Todd did in Scoville Sanctuary, you can treat it with 1% active ingredient glyphosate, which is 2% of rodeo, the wetlands approved form of glyphosate. Then, so you kill that, or you can do it with heat, which is to say, if you were working around a reservoir that might be a sensitive area, that's with a torch. It's a lot more labor and expense, but at any rate, you reduce it down to something that is a small sprig of a resprout, and then you're likely to have to come back and do a second phase on that. Now, the treatment that I'm going to demonstrate next is combines this, and this almost back to back in one step. I'm not allowing the regrowth, but I am cutting and treating, and that is with the buckthorn blaster, which is this 4-ounce bottle, which has glyphosate in it. Typically, you would wear gloves when you're handling this. It is the very same thing as a bottle that's used in the St. Joseph's Church bingo hall, which is the Staples, bingo dabber. Okay, it's got a spring release tip on it, and shall we say, when you tip it upside down, nothing comes out. It only, when you depress it on the cut stem, it releases a drop of herbicide. So the treatment there, whoops, did we fail?
Here we go.
Okay, is cut and treat. And then you bring the leaves back in, so you're not exposing soil for latent seeds in there. And that's the toolkit, what we got here. You might want to add a can of DEET to that as well. When you're, okay, my 5 minutes expired, holler, okay? Evaluating those judgments is scientific and methodological, and you can come up with a very effective treatment program with extremely little herbicide and far less labor than doing nothing or delaying. Time is not on your side when it comes to management of invasives. We're not going to have time to get into that, but again, the control costs go up as the exponential curve rises. Example of that Washini Park project, where here, this was treatment of resprouting bittersweet, this was cut and treat of invasive shrubs, and this was foliar spray of barberry. That was just a very simple way of breaking out zones within a invasive treatment. There's a breather. Can you hear me well enough?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to do knotweed next. We should be doing bittersweet vine, but since we're launching a new program here that has a larger scope, it's really regional in nature. It encompasses 7 towns, and the central spine of that area is the Housatonic River, and is, when you think about it, the richest area of biodiversity and ecological services imaginable, probably in the state of Connecticut. So it's protected from development, easements, and so forth. However, it's not protected from the most aggressive, herbaceous, invasive plant in our region, Japanese knotweed. When we think about protecting the Housatonic River, we're thinking about its recreational resources, its historic, its scenic resources, and its ecosystem resources. We're going to talk about fishing for a minute, because my inquiry into this issue of knotweed has led into some interesting directions. What this guy doesn't know is that just upstream on the Housatonic, knotweed is sneaking up on his backside so imperceptibly slowly that he is unaware of it, nor does he recognize it as a plant anyway. It fits under the all green is equal category. But by contrast, on the Deerfield River, just in northern Berkshire County, you can see how extensive the intelligence, if you will, of this plant. It has outperformed every other plant imaginable in that riparian era. Further, so how many people heard Doug Talamay talk at Hotchkiss School? Oh, good. Oh, that's impressive. Okay, so you understand. His thesis is native plants and native insects have evolved over eons of generation, many generations. And there's a great specificity between the two of them. So I asked Doug last fall, geez, Doug, have you done any comparison in areas of knotweed? He says, as a matter of fact, my doctoral student just came up with some conclusions and measured native plant, insect, herbivore activity in hedgerows of native plants versus hedgerows that had been impacted by knotweed. 10x fewer insects in the knotweed hedgerow. So I said, whoa, could we translate that from the hedgerow to the riparian zone, which is a fairly similar thing to a hedgerow, the edge of a river? And he said, you know, we could. So he started doing a little research and had his assistant explore some things. Invertebrate prey and inputs, meaning leaves, plant material, dark arrows, that have direct and indirect effects in stream and riparian food webs, including fish. I'm thinking, okay, the famous Housatonic fishing grounds may be impacted adversely by excessive knotweed. This is the native plant indexes and the novel ecosystem, meaning the knotweed or non-native plants. And you can see there's just much less going on there. It's what he refers to as interactive diversity. And his thesis really is all about how that affects birds, especially fledgling birds breeding young in the spring, and what insects are the parents going to feed the babies. Invertebrates to streams can provide up to half the annual energy in the annual, even though it only occurs in summer. So that's when the fish eat and when they grow. When the ice is frozen, they are not feeding. So Doug responded to me and said, okay, we want to compare terrestrial insects that fall into streams lined with knotweed and streams lined with native vegetation. And he outlined a structure for that. I presented that through to Trout Unlimited and then the University of Massachusetts. And we're kind of honing in on the idea of finding a undergraduate or graduate student to set these up. They would be flow traps underneath the two sides of the river. The knotweed side, and this is what Doug Talamay would refer to as an insect desert, versus this side where, hey, you could paddle, you probably would even feel the difference, quite honestly. So we're hoping to do this methodically, and though we understand that greatly alters natural ecosystems, it poses a significant threat to riparian areas. We sort of understand that, but we haven't quantified it. So we're hoping to do some advance the science here in the Housatonic watershed to explore that further and perhaps increase the urgency of responding to the knotweed invasion. Reed that took over the world from the Financial Times. The part of the world that concerns us at this time is right here. And the wild and scenic Housatonic designation particularly. What an amazing environment we live in. Think of all the productivity that's going on there. There's almost no knotweed in that section of the Housatonic River south of Dutcher's Bridge in Canaan. This is Stillwater Farm. But our survey, which I'll get into, Eagle Scout Tom Zetterstrom spotted knotweed right there going down the road. And then we started exploring further, and we found 3 sites on that. And those are scheduled for treatment in the coming year. Good thing. rather than waiting for time to pass and the knotweed to work its way down to the Housatonic and then start lining the banks of the Housatonic the way it did on the Deerfield River. Knotweed. How many of you generally recognize it? Is it generally pretty well? Yeah? Okay. Yeah. Well, here it is. As a matter of fact, I picked these just a few days ago, strapped them to the top of my car, and so I'm 6 feet tall, so they're what, 11? 12? Okay, this is a healthy plant. I'll show you where this came from. So here's what knotweed looks like in April. In May, it's already 4 feet tall by mid-May because the rhizomes, which is 60% of the biomass of the plant, is underground. So, hey, that thing is ready to go once we get to up to 60 degrees soil temperature. June, this is looking north on the Housatonic River above the Sheffield Covered Bridge. July in Sharon, okay, so it's gone from like 4 to 6 to 8 feet tall to, there's a 6 foot man, nearly 10 or 12 feet tall, you know, and that's what those stems look like by then. And here they are dormant. And this is also August. This happens to be in Cornwall, right at the edge of Stonewall Farm. And you can see what's happening here. DOT is mowing this in a June mowing, their spring mowing, if you will. And that's preventing that section mowed from forming blossoms. And that's a good thing, so there's less seed distribution. However, knotweed primarily moves through fragmentation of its stems or roots, and secondarily from seeds. And here, what would likely be happening is the mowing occurs, the brush hog or the over-the-fence mower, whatever it is, and then that fence, then it moves down the road and a few more fragments spill off as it moves down, and maybe a tenth of a mile later it drops off a little knotweed. A fragment as little as a half an inch can regenerate as a knotweed plant. Look at the blossoms and notice how little insect activity there has been, even by September on these plants. So there, as the flowers are shifting to seed form, the seed is only 1/10 of an inch. Those are wind-borne seeds, and birds and animals can move them as well. How are we doing, Deb? Okay, we're up to 15. We're doing good. Okay, so in July and August of last summer, 10 paddlers surveyed the Housatonic from the Bartholomew's Cobble at the Mass border all the way down to Boardman Bridge in New Milford. And as I had sensed, due to the advantage of topography and the narrower Housatonic compared to the Great Barrington and Sheffield floodplains, we had a lot less knotweed because of the flow rate of the river and because of less human activity. It's part of that preservation thing that's going on, but it's partly because some of those hillsides you can't grow corn on. And agriculture becomes, like other human activity, a means of moving stuff around. This is the perspective where we launched from at the Cobble, and there's Canaan Mountains, so we're looking right into Connecticut, and you see a knotweed-free environment that looked this way when I was 10 years old. Wow. So we paddled, did both sides. Do I have any paddlers here that ran that trip? No, okay. Their names should be on the slide here, and I just didn't get to it. But they're a core part of the knotweed network. And okay, this is just a little below Stillwater Farm, again, as it was in 1950. Now we're paddling, we're getting closer to the Cornwall Covered Bridge. And we encountered the mother lode of all knotweed of the Housatonic. Okay, this is behind the West Cornwall garage. And we were aware of it, shall we say. It's not as though we hadn't anticipated seeing this great shot. And we even mapped it. Is Christian Allen here? He did not make it, okay. So what happened here is, we surmise, fill was brought in here to build up that bank behind the building. And then it followed its way, and it sends out rhizomes 65 feet. Yeah, there's a drainage here, so it picked up on that and went up that way to the roadside. Little spots of it appeared here, but this occasionally got mowed, but it got across there far enough that it established on the bank of the river. Now that is a daunting task. And however, since Bob Gambino contributed his time and Christian Allen assisted, we wanted to demonstrate that it was not beyond correcting. And after year one treatment, 2017, on September 29th, at the optimal date, with no wind, dry, warm, and late in the season, such that all that chemistry was ready to descend into the root system as the shift of fall was occurring. Bob then, with his crew, was up in here treating this last September. And I would say that by June, you might want to take a look from River Park across the river and see what the effect is. When we retreated down here last summer, we used about 2% of the chemistry that was part of the initial treatment on a few sprigs that popped up, and we just shot those individually. I am hoping actually that later this afternoon to go by there and start sowing seeds, because it's going to rain on Monday, and maybe we'll see that turn to green, and it won't be green of knotweed. Now, so here it is, and think of how precarious it was, advancing toward that guy fishing down here, right? And, altering the ecosystem and possibly his catch over time. When we pulled out on that survey, we pulled out over here because we wanted to go to Pearlies. And we pulled out right into a little cluster of knotweed. So imagine that either a seed or a bird or in contaminated fill in the park introduced that plant. There it is. All right. Closer examination. Okay, we're up to 20. Okay, we're cruising now. Okay, look at that. All right, now, this was even weed whack, but because there's a certain attraction to the plant, the guy didn't weed whack it down.
Crazy.
All right, so that's the seduction of invasives right there. But the Cornwalls, imagine, untreated. This is the Sheffield covered bridge, the next covered bridge to the north. It lost it. The landscape has been adversely impacted and severely impacted. Imagine that there. If nothing was done, that's what, in 5 years, the view of the bridge would have been substantially impacted. There it is looking north. River Park had the beneficiary of somebody going in there, and we still don't know who it is. If anybody knows, please reveal. And dug up those plants, tarped the areas. And by the way, a fragment like this of knotweed is not to be left behind. You've got to bag all that stuff. If that got swept into the river in high water, you've got a propagule, it's called, it can reestablish. It's got to be tarped for 4 to 5 years to make sure that those root systems are dead. That's a long maintenance process, and the only resolution of this is to kill the root. Bear in mind, 60% of the biomass down there. This one had been missed entirely, and then the guy came back with his weed whacker and just weed whacked it. Every piece there I then picked up And a piece as small as this is a propagule. So if that got blown onto the road and moved around or swept by the river in high water, there you go again. The cycle starts over. Here's tarping in Great Barrington. Is Kathy Crisell here? No, okay. And here's tarping by HVA on the Still River. And again here, all I can say is we need all the tools we can get in our toolkit to control knotweed, including tarping. It is labor intensive, and then of course it's not killing just knotweed, it's killing everything, and you got to do a restoration afterwards for sure. In Cornwall, we talked about these sites by the covered bridge. Then there's a few sites down here by the just down Route 4. Okay. They look like there's the use of the plant as a hedge. It escapes across the tracks. It's only 100 yards from the river. So it'll be dealt with. Across the river, River Road going down to Little Church, under the bridge. Okay, I don't know if that got there through contaminated fill or mowers. This is the size where you can treat it when it's small, early detection. This is a possibility, injecting, and Bruce Bennett. You want to say a few words about injecting knotweed?
So what we did was we cut it off. There's each one of those nodules. We cut it off so there was only one nodule.
Yeah.
And then we were able to break that. That's sealed. We were able to break through that and then inject Roundup into the base of the plant, and it wiped it out completely.
Yeah, 5 milliliters per stem, or how much?
I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
It was not much.
Yeah, 2 to 5 is possible. Sari Hoy has done that in the past, native habitat restoration here. The tri-state organization that is the brainchild of Nature Conservancy invasive plant manager Jess Toro, and was the company that we hired for the Washington Park restoration. Flawlessly done. Roadside treatment, town of North Canaan. Previously cut, 99% kill, one treatment. The guy, the neighbor up there was so happy, he said, okay, I'll just keep mowing that. Done. Another site on a Canaan Road, 95% kill. We went back there last year and had about 7 or 8 sprigs that we shot. Okay, we're gonna sow this too. This is the side of Route 44 by Dutcher Bridge. We wanted DOT to treat this, but they never got to it. It is situated right here on the shoulder of the road. We're trying to protect this vernal pool from becoming a knotweed pool. Up here on the side of Route 44, we treated stuff on the east side of the road so it wouldn't get onto the west side road and therefore into the river. Okay, lastly, we're wrapping up on contaminated fill. Find out in Cornwall where your gravel yards are and see if knotweed is growing right on top of them and roots inside of them dropping seeds into them as they are in Falls Village, for example. And knotweed takes advantage of disturbed soils, therefore that's where you find it. On the side of Route 7, just north of the covered bridge, we marked with ribbon, would you please spray this? No, they got around and they mowed it. So they probably have exacerbated the problem. You can see this is not a brush hog, but it illustrates the idea that it transports fragments. Here on the tributary of the Housatonic called Salmon Kill in Salisbury, the town crew undoubtedly thought they were doing a great job backing that hog in there and right up to the edge of the river and getting that knotweed out of the way, but unfortunately they spewed hundreds of fragments into the river, which were then transported down through the lovely landscape of Whippoorwill Farm and all the way down to Lime Rock and past the Lime Rock racetrack and to the confluence at the high school with the Housatonic. We don't know what that distribution is going to turn out to be, but it probably amplified the risk of contamination 100 to 1,000-fold. So the state of Massachusetts does not allow roadside herbicide use. This ineffective, counterproductive measure of flailing at it with a brush hog over the fence mower did the same thing in the Housatonic River up at Risingdale, such that my prediction is this whole area of low-flowing water, shallows, will become a knotweed nightmare in 20 years, max. Best management practices are the subject of what's supposed to be a program with the Northwest Hills Council of Government coming up in June. I've yet to be able to find time to focus in on that, but we're going to try to render these ideas to the guys that move stuff around and mow so they can start better practices. We're going to end on a highlight here, which is the USDA Forest Service, Forest Technology Research is moving ahead with the introduction of a biological control for knotweed. All the measures that we might take going forward of the next several years to manage knotweed in the Housatonic watershed can be met over the horizon by the technology of biocontrol coming down the pikes toward us. And I've been in contact with the USDA people from, from Oregon to the University of Massachusetts, and then talked to our friend at the Nature Conservancy office in Amherst, Christian Marks, who I've known for 10 or 15 years, and he's got us on the list for a release. As that progresses, the permit has been authorized. It goes out for public comment next month. Hopefully it will proceed. If you're on the invasive knotweed list, we will alert you to the fact that you could issue comment to the USDA to support that. And basically, it includes an introduction of a Japanese insect, a sap-sucking psyllid called Aphelera itadori. Aphelera itadori. It could save our Housatonic River watershed. And that's what it looks like. And when you get enough of them sucking on a stem of the knotweed, it weakens it and reduces its vigor and its ability to spread. And maybe brings it down into more like as though a native plant would have to deal with native insects. So we're bringing it its native insect. This is the Open Space Institute. The phrase is resilient landscape illustration. And it's an interesting concept. But my question to Kim Elliman was, what happens to the resilient landscape impacted by invasive plants? He didn't have an answer. I think basically it blows a hole in the whole concept. You put your knotweed in here, you put your Phragmites in here, you wrap these in bittersweet and let them collapse. And then you've got barberry on this side congesting and preventing restoration of the forest growth. You got a mess. So I'm going to give this talk at the Cornwall Library in 2 weeks. If you want to send your friends over who didn't make it here tonight, please be aware of that. And then we're going to try to do 10 minutes on...
This will be on the Cornwall website, remember that? This video will be on the Cornwall website in an hour.
Thank you, Richard Grieg. Richard Grieg. Griggs. The media advantage of his being here is extraordinary. So send people to the Cornwall website, cornwall.org.
Cornwallct.org.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. All right, quickly on bittersweet. Okay, so we did the shrub that has the public health hazard and forest inhibition, and we did the riparian impact of the knotweed. This is the tree killer. Picking this plant, early detection, rapid response, Peter Kent at the Scoville Sanctuary. Hey, effortless. The benefit of his act was more than a 1 to 100 ratio, it was 1 to 1,000. It was such a little effort, but the benefit was extraordinary. This is what it looks like in year 1. This is a 1-year seedling. That's when you want to get these guys. Here I picked the small ones, and I was successful in getting all root gears. And then by the time I got up to here and here, I started leaving fragments behind, and I'm thinking, okay, there's gonna be regeneration there. And I delayed the inevitable, but only by a matter of a couple of years. So therefore, you might want to have that fork with you.
What's the scale, Tom?
There's a foot. So that includes the roots. So again, for early detection, very important. Chemical, okay, so that's the mechanical control. Pull small plants, entire root system. Larger vines cut close to the ground every couple of weeks to prevent resprouting. In other words, if it's in your lawn, you mow your lawn every 2 weeks, you can kill it. But I'm not sure you can remember to get out there and recut it every couple of weeks in other situations. Chemical control, dense patches, cut all vegetation to ground, allow it to regrow. We did that with Sherry's team. 6 weeks later, they treated it with triclopyr. In this park, bittersweet collapse, arboretum planted in 1929, and 80-year-old trees succumbing, 16 of them, to bittersweet. The meadow, after clearing all the debris and the burn piles, was 60 to 70% bittersweet foliage as opposed to grass. Therefore, that told us there was a network of these roots crossing all over the place throughout that whole acre of meadow. And all it wanted to do with cutting and not treating, stimulate sprouting. It's a cutting back method that's often used in the nursery trade. Dennis O'Connor, sharpshooter, individual plant, triclopyr, selective herbicide that also only impacts broadleaf plants, not grasses. A week later, all the knotweed is dying. A month later, the grasses had time to express themselves. That was a single treatment and was the right solution. We're in there, here's Todd with a bunch of Hotchkiss students, annually doing instruction about invasives and so forth. We're now ready to do some restoration planting, and this being the 100th anniversary. The centennial of this park is this year. It was originally established 100 years ago to plant trees in honor of those who served in the war. And it wasn't maintained properly, respectfully. Kent Land Trust under Bill Arnold did this treatment of bittersweet on a hedgerow that was only done mechanically. I think cutting the vines at height and then pulling them out with a backhoe. And then you've got to do, some management and mowing afterwards. But you can see all the vines that were in there. Without action, that would have been a collapsed hedgerow. And not a landscape asset, but a liability. Farmers used to be proud of their hedgerows. They would actually maintain them. That was what they did in the winter. So you can go ahead and do this, and that helps. But because birds from contaminated areas are also going to light in there and void their seeds, there will be regeneration. So it's a matter of management. We got 5 minutes to go. We're moving along. Salisbury School. Pine trees. Time passes. Invasive solution. Convert it to lawn. Not really an environmental solution. Across the street in Washington Park, Todd. These vines are bigger than his leg. Nearly as big as his chest. Christian Allen assisted Todd cut and treat. Christian did the annual ring cut to 1945. The year of my birth. The Truman administration. Look at the size of that thing. That was being supported by a pine tree there, and now that pine tree has been liberated, treated with glyphosate. Probably an ounce or two we might have used on that.
Probably less.
Probably less.
Probably less than that.
But as Doug Talamay said to us, if you don't kill that thing, it's gonna haunt you like a hydra for the next 20 years.
Much less than an ounce.
Yeah, much less than an ounce, yeah. So we are only treating the sapwood, incidentally. There's heartwood when you get up to a vine that size. Here on in the same property, you know, the grounds guys don't know the difference, and they're cutting the vines, but where there was 5 on vines, I counted up 57 resprouts. So cutting alone is not a management tool. Here's Roger Lydell holding one that he remembers cutting and didn't treat. 1 became 5. Treat, treat, treat. Here at the flagship, now Sharon Land Trust site, is the home of a big old oak, which was encumbered by bittersweet vines going to its top of its crown. That was cut and treated by then Executive Director Sarah Kuhn and volunteers. You can see the vines cuts here. We cut it at chest height so we can get in there and then treated the stems. The tree now survives. It happens to be the state champion chickapin oak, which is 48 inches in diameter, 96 feet tall, with a spread of 106 feet. Could have died if we didn't do what we did. So think of it, a tree that might be 200 years old, taken down by a vine that might have been 30 or 40 years old. You can see that how unfair these plants are. Christian Allen treating on June 7th on my property. Clock is running down to 3 minutes, although Karen took more time than she was supposed to. But the key here is these were cut and treated by mid-July, and therefore there was no seed production that year. This is key because seed production is extraordinary, and it mostly occurs out of sight. You know, unless you're standing back and looking up there. Whoops, that is strange. Okay. Okay, so listen. Behind there is Todd and Christian treating with about 4 ounces, a whole forest of conifers planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s. And with 4 ounces, they saved an acre of conifers. It's an extraordinary achievement. Preventing this from occurring, which happens to be on the side of Route 7, just north of my place, into Massachusetts. In 1957, that road was cut through there, bypass Route 7. I remember it. And hey, they did nice landscaping back in those days. It was considered a scenic gateway to Massachusetts, but no longer. Now, a few years after this photograph, these things are lying on the ground like chopsticks, you know, or what is it, I Ching or something, whatever you do with it, throwing the sticks. At the high school, wrapping up our North Campus, and this is important because Northwest Conservation District had a role, and there is the cartographer, Mike Morin of the Northwest Conservation District at that time, produced this extraordinary map for us. It looks like this. It became our treatment management tool because he broke it out into areas of the concentration of certain invasives. We have saved trees marked in triangles, and we did special treatment around those, and then a variety of other treatments elsewhere. And working with Bob Gambino, stayed up Bob, our river commissioner, and former Housatonic Valley Regional High School horticulture teacher. Who also led the Cornwall garage attack. And here he is working with one of the students, bringing that in. So we're trying, you can see what was the understory of this unmanaged woodland. It basically, the only purpose of the trees was to support the support of the vines. It was so severe that we brought in, what's his name from Norfolk? Phil Lovett. And he shredded that, but quite honestly, it was still such a mess. Because we were really at the biological potential. It really had gone so far. So hey, the school decided we got to grade this and seed it. So it got some conservation mix put on there. Here we have Peter Picone of the DEEP and the entomologist from CEAG, and Bill Moorhead, rare plant specialist, and Michael Menadow, looking at that, evaluating it. And 2 years later, we got natural regeneration and did a bee survey there with students, and we found we had 17 species of native bees.
Wow.
So there's a pollinator success story. They're not necessarily honeybees, but they're Connecticut's wild bee population. Surprise to me, there are 400 species of wild bees in Connecticut. Who would have known? I didn't know. Okay, so there's future here. Let's say I should throw something out to you all, in case you got contacts and a good network. Here we have some further concepts for restoration within that pollinator meadow. And if we really had $2,000 to $7,000, we had an estimate from someone to implement this. It was $7,000, way too much for our Arboretum and Landscape Committee, which survives on about $3,000 a year. If anybody wants to become involved with this project, let me know. And at the high school, so that's at North Campus up here, and then just recently we've started working this riparian strip, which is impacted by shrub invasives and some bittersweet. And in the next couple of weeks, there are 10 students at the high school who got detention. This is what they're going to be working with Christian Allen, loppers. He's going to be doing the treatment. So this is our new salvation, our workforce. Okay? Doug Talabay says, Tom, you're exactly right. Succession is dead in invasive zones. It moves for perpetual tangle of invasive vines, porcelain berry, bittersweet, etc., and pulling down and smothering native vegetation. It's not a happy view of the future. And I think I ended. Thank you so much.
Devotion, energy, I can't get over your energy. And he has time to take questions. Hold it up.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions. I just didn't want to let this concept go. Because I was working on the cliffs of the quarry there with Victor Flores in October, and I had the benefit of finding this bittersweet vine that was growing in a crack in the rocks. It was just filled with pine needles, so I could extract the whole thing out carefully. And I left it up there in the woods. So this is to give you the sense of proportion. So even a vine that's no bigger than a pencil thickness has a 10-foot root. You aren't going to get all the root out by digging it, okay? So the treatment would be cut it here, buckthorn blaster, and kill the root. Okay, questions, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
When you pull a small bittersweet, what do you do with it?
Oh, you could, if it's completely separated and it's not going to rain for the next week solid, I think you could, just stick it someplace where it's not going to contact soil. My first job was working for the U.S. Forest Service, White Pine Blister Rust Control Patrol, and we went around eradicating gooseberries and currant berries because they were the co-host for the disease of the spores that affects white pines. And we yanked them out, and then we just hung them up in a barbed wire fence or in a branch of a tree or something like that. So you could notch them someplace.
So
Or you put them in a
don't
plastic
put it
bag.
in the transfer station.
Yeah, just so they, I wouldn't, I wouldn't leave them lying around in a wetland.
No,
Yeah,
that's what I mean, you have to do something
Yes.
with it.
I have enormous amounts of knotweed that I deal with every year. What's the best way to get rid of what you cut down?
which weed?
Knotweed,
Knotweed? Well,
right along the street.
let it, if it dries, it is not a problem. If it's dry and dead, like these, okay, it doesn't want to go in your compost pile.
No.
And it's a lot of material. It's a lot of material to take to the transfer station.
Black bag it?
But she said she's
I think you want to just stack it and store it in an area where you can manage it, but you're talking about the above ground part of the plant. Yeah, I guess I would say,
Put on black plastic out in the sun or something.
yeah, you could tarp over it and solarize it, so-called. Sari.
So when we're working huge patches like that, often we're working in areas we cannot physically remove it because we're too far away.
Yeah.
So what we tend to do is we'll sort of pull it up away from the bank so it's not going to fall into the stream, and almost pile it so that it does solarize in its space.
Yeah.
And also that means that anything that's going to sprout from those cuttings, you can easily find because they're in those piles.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I think the lady said that she burns it, which is a good way to deal with it. Yes.
So is that what you said? You do burn it?
Mountainside, yeah.
Okay, I would say let it get dry and burn it, or just let it burn it wet, or what?
Well, I mean, if she's burning it, it's a great
Yeah,
way
I
to
burn
do
it when
it.
it's dry.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
The key is, like you said, not to let it.
Yeah, if you cut it,
down.
if you cut it in June when it's this high, it will only regrow to about that height. So keep it low, or leap over from mechanical to chemical, and it can be gone in a couple of years. Yeah.
When's the best season to cut and treat the vine?
Yeah, good question. Hey, we had some experiment with that and some emails, and you can cut and treat bittersweet vine right now and it will be effective. Once those leaves start to be pushing out and those juices are really flowing through that plant, there's a lot of hydrostatic upward pressure, and you can just see it oozing out. So then there's a break through May and June until the beginning of July. We were successful in knocking out that bittersweet, and they were this big, on July 7th. So I would say, don't treat in May, June. Resume treatment in July or through September, October, November. Slightly less effective in November.
July is nice because you can eliminate seed production. If you cut it, if you cut it in the middle of summer, it won't have produced fruits and seeds yet, which is a real plus.
And the same question for bayberry. When's the best time to barberry, excuse me, to pull it and treat it?
Well, I would say pulling it not when it has ripe seeds on it that you could be inadvertently sowing, which would be in late fall. Persisting seeds through the winter. I found 3 or 4 seeds on a plant, actually it's right here, that I pulled up a few days ago. I'm gonna have to put gloves onto this. The cut and treat of barberry with the buckthorn blaster could occur anytime. Basically, shrub treatment with the buckthorn blaster can control anytime if it's above 40 or 45 degrees. Is that confirmed? Yeah? Yeah, these are
As far
resident
as trying to pull it out of the ground, it's a lot easier when the ground is moist.
Yeah, good point. Hey, like Monday, we're going to get a ½ inch of rain. Tuesday would be a good day to pull it. The plants look like this right now, and shall we say, this was pulled 2 days ago, and oh darn, it may be stuck in there. Let's see, I'm going to pull up a smaller sample. These were the plants that I successfully pulled by hand. That bigger one I used to come along because I was trying to protect my appendages. So this was the size that I felt, okay, there was no sudden snap that meant I was breaking anything. So these were smaller plants that were, of 2 or 3 stems apiece. And okay, there's about 6 stems in there. That seems to be one plant. Yeah. And then, okay, look at that. There's a berry right there. I don't know if you can see it. The others fell off, but that persisted all winter. So I was careful not to like drop those berries into the little section of soil that I had just disturbed. But by next week, all of these little leaves will be out, and it will be a lot more visible to see in the woods. So I would say wait a week or two, and you know, if you get a sense of your property and you can gradually push back against the invasion, you can contain it that way. You don't have to get it all in year one. You know, I've been working on my own land. Actually, these barberry plants are nearly the last barberry plants on my property. That guy is almost off the list. Yeah, Roger.
Tom, my question and comment is on what is a homeowner to do when challenged with significant stands of whatever it is, knotweed.
Significant.
And my sense is that for the smaller plants, buckthorn blaster, cut and paint, but if spraying is needed, then that is something where we homeowners should be turning to professionals. When I see these ads on the telly, you know, come out with your Roundup and squirt all over the place to kill dandelion, these are powerful chemicals, and I think it's insane. In fact, you may have been hearing or reading about a glyphosate litigation jury award in California, a homeowner, and the article went on to say that over a period of, I think, 26 years, this homeowner had used 6,000 gallons of Roundup. And so anyway, it's the lack of knowledge among all of us generally. And if you're spraying yourself, you have to wash the equipment. But there's all of that stuff that leads me to say the professionals sitting over there are resources that we should be aware of and minimize risks and guarantee successes on our own properties.
Excellent point. And to that point, Roger, and thank you to the Sharon Land Trust, in your booklet you will see a list of about 8 invasive plant managers in our region. And some of them specializes in one or the other thing, and Sari and Jess are both on that list. So I would say get a couple of estimates and see what, and Ron Yapel is on that list with Race Mountain Tree Service. Mike Schmidt. Go ahead.
I have a bigger picture question about this evolving ecosystem we've got going on in climate change. And because we're seeing more insects and these blooms of invasives. And in fact, they're all evolving together. And in fact, there's quite a bit of data about Japanese knotweed, the roots of it in particular, having an antidote for Lyme disease. So as the Lyme is increasing and knotweed's increasing, the antidote, there's this antidote in the root system for Lyme disease. So is anybody harvesting this that you know of around here and looking at that?
There's a knotweed industry in Washington State, as a matter of fact, and so there are other, should we say, in terms of herbal medicinals, I'm not familiar really, although it was said in the Lakeville Journal after our article appeared in September in a letter to the editor, well, what are you doing killing that knotweed? It's loaded with resveratrol, okay, so that's an antioxidant that you find in red wine. I don't drink, so I do red grapes, and that's my source of resveratrol. There may be an antidote to Lyme disease. I'm going to stay with the doxycycline myself, and I would say herbal remedies are sometimes anecdotal, and do some research before you buy into it. I don't think we're ever going to deplete the knotweed supply to a critical point. And although I am hopeful that Aphilara itadori is going to take us out of the knotweed jungle and back to a native landscape.
How successful has that been, do you know?
Say it again?
How successful has the cella been in biologically controlling the knotweed?
Yeah.
Has it been pretty successful?
Okay, so Debbie is going to have this for the Cornwall copy. This is the USDA perspective on the biology and biological control of knotweed. I had a few slides from it up here. This is once the comments are received through May and June, and hopefully permission for release occurs. It was released in the UK in 2005 and in Canada in 2016. Canada is a little cool for this insect. Hopefully our temperatures will support it. The release that will be occurring, managed out of Amherst area, UMass and TNC, will be in probably later this year or 2019 for sure. And I'm hoping that we will be on their 2020 list.
The question was, has it been shown to be successful yet in some?
Yeah, it has. It is actually. There's even high hope for it. And when I spoke to Fritzi Grevstad of the USDA, who's leading this research, I said, well, come on, what can you tell me? I know you're a scientist and you want the evidence, but what's my best hope? And I said, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? She said, maybe as soon as 5 years. But listen, it's not yet proven. They have to do release sites, and then they go back and they monitor to see survival and reproduction. The insect will have, I think, 7 to 9 reproduction cycles in a year, so it'll crank up once it starts. And when I read that, I'm thinking, okay, so my getting bent out of shape on this plant over the last couple of years may get resolved ultimately, and that the work we've done is not going to be futile, and then it gets into resolution. Do we want to wrap up or any? Okay.
I was just curious, have you found that horseweed is predominant in this area?
Horseweed?
Yeah.
Horseweed?
Horseweed?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all over the place. Yeah. You mean, there's 2 plants that are sometimes called horseweed. That's
It's like a milk type weed. If you pull it out and set it on the ground and regrows, it sounds just like this.
It's not horsetail. I'm not sure what.
Okay, I'm just sure what you're referring to.
Todd used to be the #1 invasive plant specialist for the state of Connecticut. If he doesn't know it, I'm not sure we got
They
it.
get maybe 6 feet tall, 8 feet tall, they grow like that.
Hogweed.
Yeah,
Anyways, okay.
we're not a good resource for that. Okay, a final question?
Tom, I'll embarrass you. Think of the win-win situations that Tom is telling us about, and more importantly, he's doing them. Take the example of at the high school. If he is opening up careers, the future farmers of America may be facing a problematic situation, but he is opening up future landscape managers, and there's an unlimited economic potential, career potential for these kids, and he's bringing all this to the community just out of his passion, and well, bless you.
Well, thanks, Roger, but listen. To respond to Roger ever so quickly, what goes on at the regional high school in FFA is quite remarkable. Bob Gambino was part of that faculty previously. David Moran is a horticulture student there. He is teacher of the country material by all standards. And We're happy to have that engagement with other organizations and community into that program. There's a lot more that could be done there, I should say, in terms of invasive management and really creating a curriculum that takes that forward. We've been talking about it, and we have to move that agenda forward. I guess I would make one last comment, and that is, we are so fortunate that that is an ag school. As an ag school, it is exempt from the restriction of all other grade schools and high schools in Connecticut that are not ag schools, where in their, shall we say, limited consideration, the Connecticut Assembly passed legislation that prevented essentially all use of all herbicides on all campuses, with the exception of certain organic, but unfortunately, when it comes to woody invasives, ineffective chemicals. Therefore, the surrounding habitat of most campuses is becoming progressively an invasive, skyrocketing transition to forest collapse, enhanced tick environment, and visual despair. I'm not sure we're ready yet to have that conversation with Maria Horn, but exemptions, as were the case with Tony Peel, need to be made for the control of invasive plants. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, and I would like to thank everybody. I would like to make sure that we're greatly appreciative.
Did everybody get the clipboard to
Yep.
sign up or wanted to sign up?
To the Cornwall Library for hosting community events like this. But I'd want to do a big shout out. I got called by this man because he's a good steward, asked if he needed a wetlands permit to take care of those patches of knotweeds down in West Cornwall, so it came to our Wetlands Commission. Just as a heads up, and as a result, we had one of our exemplary members step up to the plate, be the representative, and I wish to thank Debbie Bennett for all the work that she's done in this, because it is volunteers that spend a lot of time like you that provide all this education, and we are very, very grateful.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Tom.